All right. So our subject is fear versus faith. And I'm kind of going off of the life of Jeremiah, the prophet. He spent 40 years trying to lead Israel back to God. He was imprisoned. He was beaten up. He was threatened. His life was threatened. He very nearly died. He had a rough time. I want to study Jeremiah at some point. But in the Lamentations, it's a series of poems. In Lamentations 3, he talks about his fear and his discomfort. And then he says, that I kind of started to lose hope. And he says, but then I remembered. And then we have one of our very beautiful songs where in Lamentations 3:23, he says, great is your faithfulness. Speaking about God. We defined faith last week. What is the definition of faith according to the Bible? Anita had it last week.
Substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not
Yep.
seen.
Extra credit bonus points. It's found in
13.
11.
11.
11. Very good. All right. Faith is absolute confidence that God will keep his promises. I mean, he always has. I mean, every single promise that we read about, we can know that he has kept it, and that's our evidence that he will continue to keep his promises. We defined fear last week. How would you define fear? Nobody's ever been afraid.
Unknown.
Unknown?
Yeah. I don't know if that's the definition of fear.
Well, certainly that's something to be afraid of.
Being hurt.
Yes, that's a big one.
Anxiety about
Mhm. It's defined as an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain, or a threat. So the unknown and all that kind of stuff goes into that. Let's go ahead and read from Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, where Jesus talks about fear.
that would be me. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell.
Thank you. All right. So Jesus declares fear of the Lord as a necessary, good, positive thing that we need to have as part of our lives. The fear of the Lord, of his anger and judgment, leads to wisdom and life. We looked at Psalm 111:10 last week and Proverbs 14:27, where it says the fear of the Lord leads to wisdom. The fear of the Lord leads to life. But then Jesus goes on to talk about the negative aspect of fear. So he says that one's the good fear. Any other fear, he says, don't have it. And it's like, well, wait a minute. There's a list.
It's respect.
Absolutely. But again, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of scared of the idea of hell. It's kind of like, it's a thing that it's kind of like, a kid, they might obey you. They might not obey you because they love you and all, but they will obey you if you say, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. And you put a proper fear in them, not I'm scared of you, you're going to hurt me fear, but there are consequences to my actions.
Fear the devil.
I know, exactly. So he says here in verse 28, he says, do not be afraid of those who can kill the body. Verse 26, he had already said, do not fear them. Verse 31, he says again, do not fear. Now, remember, fear is defined as being afraid of someone that is likely to be dangerous, painful, or threatening. And yet Jesus 3 times in just the short discourse says, do not be afraid of someone, of anyone, or any circumstance, even if it's dangerous, even if it might cause pain, and even if it might threaten us. So don't be afraid of all that stuff. Now, we talked about this last week, and I, in my opinion, also, Jesus isn't talking about that initial emotional response, because fear causes decisions. I'm going to feel afraid when I see a snake. That's an emotional, visceral, reflexive, instinctive response. Now, what fear is going to cause is action or inaction.
It's not always fear with me, the snakes.
Definitely. No.
It's like worms. I'm not
fear,
afraid of
yeah.
them, but I don't like.
Snakes are going to cause a reaction from you. But anyway, so Jesus is talking here about addressing our responses and attitudes toward things of this life that want to make us fearful. So, this is a Bible class, and so we won't be addressing specific fears, but how fear affects us and our relationship with God, and identifying God's solution to that. Because God doesn't ever say, just, don't do this. He always provides a do this instead. So it's not just, right. It's not just stop acting at, stop doing anything at all. It's do this positive thing. And I've identified 3 steps that I'm hoping to go through that so far is helping me stay focused and not chase rabbits, which is amazing for my studying. But again, 3 steps to help us get closer to obeying that command. Do not be afraid. First, identify how fear tempts us to do something contrary to God's will. And then secondly, identify how giving into that fear will prevent us from receiving God's blessing. And thirdly, identify how faith enables us to hold on to God's blessings and abolish that fear. And I think those are on your worksheet again this week. So each week I hope to identify a negative impact that fear has on our relationship with God, and then the motivation we need to overcome that fear. And so for this week, it's fear paralyzes, but faith empowers. Any comments as I'm just flying along here? I studied this so fast yesterday after Sarah left. It was just kind of like, okay, I know what I had in my head. I'm hoping to get it out now. So think of, when you think of the fear responses, you think fight or flight, but there's a third one, freeze. Okay. Have you ever seen someone in a fearful situation and they just totally freeze?
Yeah.
I have. I was in the 5th grade. We had a little bit of a farm at the time, and we had hired a young man, high school senior, to help us out. My father was wanting to burn out an old storm cellar because he saw some snakes in there and some snake skins. He says, just safest just to burn it out. So he had peeled back the cover of it, put an accelerant in there. We were to stand far back, and he had the young man, because he was like 17, 18, holding a water hose, and the water was going. He says, just in case. Well, and then, so my father, he has a torch, and so he's, I just remember seeing him, just kind of gingerly reaching toward that, because he didn't want to get close to it. Well, the accelerant he used was gasoline because he couldn't find kerosene. I watched the fire jump up that torch, up his arm, and then he was on fire from the waist up.
Oh,
Well, my father, and this saved his life, he did not freeze. He did, he dropped and rolled immediately. Well, the young man was standing there with the water hose, absolutely frozen like a statue.
He didn't spray. He was in shock.
He didn't move at all. And so the rest of us are running toward him, toward my father. And I remember snatching the water hose as we're going by, because the guy was just frozen. And he was just completely unresisting. When I snatched the hose, he was just kind of, and I looked back and he was still like this. And he was just, still frozen, in the position of holding that water hose, because he was just totally frozen, and fear froze him on the spot. And it's an amazing thing to see that, because fear causes a reaction or it causes inaction. So we're going to look at King Saul and Goliath, and we're going to see that inaction, that where fear freezes us and paralyzes us. So a little history about this. Once Israel settled in Canaan, they were led by judges who were appointed by God for some 400 years. Do we remember why, as I'm flying through this, why Israel wanted a king? Everybody else has one. 1 Samuel 8, starting in verse 19, they said, we want a king. We want someone to judge us, not the person that God picks, but, someone that, maybe we'll have a little more influence and he won't say things that make us feel bad. And then also they said, we want someone to fight our battles for us. That has always struck me as so interesting, because it's kind of like they had the responsibility from God. God said, go fight this battle. And they said, well, we want somebody to fight our battles for us. And God's kind of like, well, what am I, chopped liver? I mean, and God tells Samuel, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me as king over them, because God was their king. God was the one that led them into battle, and they rejected that for someone else. All right. So who was the first king? Saul was. Okay. Do you remember the description of him from 1 Samuel chapter 10? where he's described,
Taller than
he was
everybody
very
else.
tall. Head and shoulders taller than anybody else, good looking man. Yeah,
First, it seemed like he was really a good king.
yes, and he was a good king at first.
Till
And-
he got so jealous that David.
Well, he disobeyed God first until he started kind of believing in his own press. He built a monument to himself. Started going off the rails. And yes, it does. That's why God said, you don't need a king because he warned them ahead of time this would happen. Samuel says of Saul, you see him whom the Lord has chosen. Surely there is no one like him among all the people. This guy, good looking, really tall. I mean, he looked like a king. Okay. And so things go along well for a while. In 1 Samuel 14, starting in verse 47, there's this list. Saul was very successful in battle. And there's this list of him defeating all of Israel's enemies, including the Philistines, who we're going to talk about in just a second here. But everything changed in 1 Samuel chapter 15, where Saul disobeyed God. Probably, in my opinion, the power went to his head and he built a monument for himself. He didn't obey God. And the reason he gave in verse 24 was, I feared the people and listened to their voice. But he's still, he's blaming everybody and he's saying, well, I did. And you see a completely different heart when you read his response to being confronted with his sin than when David was confronted with his sin. Completely different heart, because he's kind of like, he tells Samuel, it's like, come with me, so that people can still see that you're with me. And it's just kind of like completely different heart. But anyway, and 1 Samuel chapter 16 tells us that as a result, the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. So he no longer had the protection of God's Spirit, whatever that meant. He rejected God. And so God's kind of like, well, okay, let you do what you want to do. All right. So that brings us to 1 Samuel chapter 17. So let's go ahead and read.
1-3-4.
Yes, please.
Now the Philistines gathered their arms together to battle and were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah. They encamped at Soko and
This other place.
Azekah and Ephes Damon, I think there. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together. They encamped in the valley of Elah and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side with the valley between them. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. I read too much, sorry.
Okay, so the next person, 6 to 8 through 8. So yeah, there you
And he had bronze armor on his legs and bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. And a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me.
If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us. Again, the Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. All right. So you have this challenge. So picture the scene. You have kind of these rolling hills where they've gone, and you have one army camped over here, one army camped over here. There's a valley in between, and they yell and scream at each other for a while before they actually enter into battle. Okay. They do the same thing in a football game. You have your army over here, you have your army over there. There's yelling and screaming and all to psych each other up before they start going. Well, Goliath comes on the scene, and it's just kind of like, imagine, the average height at the time was about 5'5". Okay, anybody in here 5'5"? 5'6". Okay, all right. So about 5'5" was about the average height, and of men, and they see this guy somewhere between, I don't know, 7 and 9 feet. So picture the height of the ceiling. And so picture this guy who, comes in, has to stoop down, and he comes in and he's standing there. I know he's huge. And even from across the valley, he's huge. And you kind of get a little quiet, and then he starts yelling. And so he's probably walking in halfway across the valley, and he starts yelling. He says, fight me. And I'm kind of like, nuh-uh, that would be me. But again, so this challenge continues, and verse 16 tells us it continues twice a day for 40 days. That's a long time. That's over a month. And verse 24 tells us that the army, the Israelite army that God has been leading and giving victory to for 400 years, they have the same response every time. They fled from him and were greatly afraid. Now, wait a minute. God has conquered Egypt. God has conquered, Jericho, the walls just fell down, conquered Canaan, has given Saul multiple victories. So within their lifetime, victory after victory, and they are greatly afraid. They run from this guy. Well, now he's pretty scary. Fear, remember, fear is that unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. That's Goliath right there. Okay, he's all three of those. All right. When the average height of a man was probably 5'5", based on the description, Saul was probably about 6'2". Okay, so everybody probably hit him right about here. I'm familiar with that feeling.
The numbers on it, and it turned out that he was about 9.5 feet.
Yeah, they go back and forth with how tall he was, but it's just the guy's huge. Yeah, I remember.
Big,
yeah.
especially for that day.
Yes. And when I worked at a park, there was an old weaving loom, just a big old huge things. And I remember the beam. The beam was that big around. And so this guy was carrying that around with his big old paws. But fear says there is no way that these average guys, or even Saul above average, could defeat Goliath. Well, of course,
man's logic.
Right. But of course they couldn't have done, had any of these victories without God. So that gets us to step one, identifying how fear tempts us to do something contrary to God's will. Fear tempts us to give up without even trying. I can't, and since I can't, I won't even try. Does anybody else ever had that feeling? It's kind of like, I know I can't do this. Yeah, you've already failed. It's kind of like, I can't, so I won't even try. You're paralyzed. You can't act. The Israelite army couldn't retreat because the Philistines would have chased them. They couldn't they couldn't move forward and fight. They were stuck for 40 days, and each day Goliath came out and shouted at them. Imagine what's going on. These are trained men. This isn't just a group of shepherds or anything like that. These are trained, well-equipped fighters. Saul is head and shoulders taller than them. He is armed like all the others. They're all wearing armor. They have their chariots, their horses. They're ready to go, and they can't move. They're frozen in fear. They are paralyzed by fear. So Goliath continues to challenge twice a day for 40 days. That's a lot of challenge. That's a lot of fear. That's a lot of in the face of God's people, because they come to Canaan saying, we're backed up by God. We follow the true God, and he's going to give us this land. And then Goliath is saying, I defy you, meaning I defy you and all your gods and everybody who came with you and the horse you rode in on. He is defying everything that he stands for. Now, this is long enough that Jesse sent David to go and check on his brothers. What's going on? There's no word from the battlefield. Well, there wasn't anything to report. You're not going to send runners talking about victory or defeat or anything like that when there's nothing to report. We're just stuck here. We're not doing a thing. Being paralyzed by fear means that we can't act. And like the Israelite army, we know what we should be doing. I mean, they had a job, they knew what they should be doing. We as Christians, we have a job, we know what we should be doing. But fear can keep us from even thinking clearly enough to figure out how to do what we know we should be doing. Let's go ahead and read James chapter 4, verse 17.
Who has James 4:17?
Did I not hand that out?
You say, James?
I said James.
James.
That would be it.
Oh, okay.
17. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him is sin.
That tells me right there that if I say I can't, and since I can't, I won't even try, but I know I should be doing something.
That's a sin.
James has some strong words about that. If you know what you should be doing and you don't, well, it doesn't matter what's keeping you from doing what's right.
Sin.
It's still a sin. It doesn't matter if we're scared or not. It's still a sin. So fear can paralyze us so that we forget that God is the one who fights for us. Did I hand out Joshua 23:10? I don't know that I did. Maybe I did.
Yes.
Okay.
One man of you shall chase 1,000, for the Lord your God is he who fights for you, as he promised you.
Thank you. All right. So this is the second step. I kind of jumped ahead of myself here. Identifying how giving into the fear prevents us from receiving God's blessings. When fear paralyzes us, when we don't do anything in action, it's easy to forget that God's the one who fights for us. And that's what happened here with Saul and the entire army. They were paralyzed and they forgot who's actually fighting for us. The victory isn't because we're the strongest. They were actually always a very small nation surrounded by much larger nations. But it was God who fought for them. And the idea from Joshua 23:10, when one of you will put to flight, was 1,000 or, but again, that's not normal. But that's what God did. I mean, God sent hornets.
Shows his power.
Yes, because it was God who fights for us. But when we say I can't, when we get paralyzed, when we get stuck in inaction, it's easy to forget. It's kind of, well, I can't do that. I can't do that by my own. Well, of course we can't. But putting the focus on me, on the I can't, that you forget. Who's actually doing this battle? Who's actually the one in control? Well, it's not certain. It's sure not me. But if I focus on the I can't, then it's easy to forget. Well, God is the one who gives us strength. Now, fears don't usually stay stagnant. I read that psychologists have discovered that our thoughts develop pathways, almost like rainwater going through a rut. And so we get deeper and deeper into that. And over time, fears become more and more entrenched. It's kind of like, I can't, so I won't. Well, the next thing that comes along, I can't, so I won't, again and again. And we're paralyzed by that. And I read that the greatest damage fear causes is that it alters decision making. And again, that's what happened with Saul and Goliath. If Saul had been repentant, truly repentant, and had, and had the Spirit of God in him, there's no way that not any one of those members, the army of God, the army of Israel, could have just stepped up and said, I know God. I mean, David did. He wasn't any stronger than any of these other grown men. Any one of them with confidence in God could have stepped forward and said, I'll take him. And they could have done it. Because, I mean, that's when Jesus tells us the faith of a mustard seed will move mountains. Okay. Because the power is in God. And when we forget that power, when we limit that power to, because I feel I can't, then we lose out there. So again, here we have King Saul, who was paralyzed from making any decision, and 40 days have passed. And their king, the one who's supposed to lead them, fight for them, can't make a decision. So much so, and he's had all these successful campaigns. He knows that God has been with him. But he was so paralyzed that when a young man of probably about 15 years old came to him offering to take on that responsibility and take that responsibility from him, he accepted, even though he knew and did not believe that David could win. And verse 33, he said that you're a youth, you can't win. There's no way. He's been fighting all his life, but I don't want to deal with this. So you go ahead. Hopefully the Lord will be with you. Have at it. But he said, it's kind of like, but again, that's how Saul's faith went. It's kind of like, well, I know this is the way, things should be done, but I'm not going to do it that way. He did not have that faith. Fear can make us forget that God is the one who fights for us. When I start relying on my own strength, of course it's going to fail every time. Okay. Any other comments as we're
I've seen that in 37 where David says, God delivered me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, and he will deliver
right.
me. His faith was
right in God.
in
And he
God's
knew,
ability.
right, he knew a 15-year-old,
Small to
right.
do.
He knew a 15-year-old had not killed a lion. He knew a 15-year-old had not killed a bear. He fought anyway, because it's kind of like, okay, I've got to do the work. He did his part. He did the work. God provided the power. All right. So, I've been using the word paralyzed, and that is a very strong word. I mean, I don't often see people frozen in fear like I described that 17, 18-year-old man, young man at our farm, because paralyzed is a very strong word. And in this time, he was young. Well, and I was 10. Yeah, I was 10 and I grabbed the water hose. I'm sorry. He froze, and not saying anything against him, because fear does that.
That taught him something.
Yeah.
It's like I froze when I ran over a cat one time. Stopped in the middle of the road. It was a curve of the road. When I was about 16, just learned to drive. And a fellow come behind me. He says, he thought something happened to me. He said, what's the matter? I said, I ran over a cat. Still under the car. He said, can you do something like that? To the side.
Yeah. Pull off.
Just ran over.
Yeah.
And I thought, that made me think, yeah,
Yep.
that was stupid.
But again, but yeah. So yeah, but paralyzed is a strong word. And in this country, we don't have so much to fear being a Christian that we're at the point where we could be paralyzed by that necessarily. That's not the case in much of the world, where people are in fact in danger of being in prison, of being actually, we're a lot closer than we used to be. I think, things are definitely changing, but right here, right now, I can't really say that I feel paralyzed by fear of being a Christian. But I can say that while I'm not terrified to share the gospel, because someone might, it's uncomfortable, right? I don't know what to say. I don't know how people will react. Well, someone could, someone might punch you right now, but anyway, and other circumstances, like, maybe I haven't seen someone at worship for a while. It's like, I could call them, but that's kind of uncomfortable. I don't know them that well. And it's the elder's job, right? To contact people that aren't showing up. And actually, this one I heard just 2 weeks ago, there's not a single thing, or there's not a thing that single women can do in the church. So I'm not doing anything. I don't do anything because there's nothing for me to do.
For a reason not to serve God.
And again, but you hear that I can't attitude in each of those scenarios. Okay. It's not, I'm paralyzed by fear, but I'm uncomfortable. And I don't know how. Oh yeah, absolutely. Right. You can't do it. So just say that you can't. But yeah, I heard a woman just telling me, it's kind of like, well, there's nothing for me. I can't do anything. There's nothing for single, I don't do anything because there's nothing for single women to do in the church. Didn't think 30 seconds before we started was a time for me to start listing off the things that she could be doing. But that I can't attitude is so prevalent. I grew up hearing from single women, there's nothing for women to do in the church. I grew up hearing that, and I'm kind of like, wait a minute, what? But it produces, even if it's an I can't attitude, even if it's a discomfort, it produces the same effect as being paralyzed by fear. It produces inaction. And we've already gone to James 4:17, where if we're not acting what we know to do, James says it's sin. But again, regardless of why, regardless of it's, I'm terrified of public speaking, or I'm just really uncomfortable talking with people. Either one has the same result. And when Jesus says, don't let fear control you, don't be afraid of anything else. Do what you're supposed to do. You know? Any other comments on here as we're finishing up for step 2 here? Okay, I'm much more likely to not do something and have an I can't over a discomfort feeling, or I'm not sure feeling than, oh, I'm just terrified of that. Except for public speaking, I was terrified of public speaking. So step 3, identify how faith enables us to hold on to God's blessings. So step 3 here, and what Paul could, or excuse me, what Saul could know, what his army could know, what David did know and expressed, we can know that God has already won the battle. It's already done. It's a done deal. There's no question about the outcome, that God has won the battle. Did I give someone 1 Samuel chapter 12?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna read verse 20.
Sure.
When Samuel said to the people, do not fear. You have done all this wickedness, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. Do not turn aside, for then you would go after empty things which cannot profit or deliver, for they are nothing. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you his people. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you, but I will teach you the good and the right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you.
Okay. So here again, he's telling them, don't be afraid of this other stuff. Fear the Lord, do the right thing.
Of course, verse 25.
Yeah.
But if you still do wickedly,
Yep.
you shall be swept away, both you and your king.
Mm-hmm. But this is, Jesus is basically repeating this in Matthew chapter 10, where it says, do not fear anything else, because God has already won, but fear the Lord. God had given Israel victories over their enemies for 400 years. There was no reason not to know that. There's no reason for us not to know that, because we can see time after time, every time God keeps his promises. Every time he makes one, whether it's for good or ill, he keeps his promises.
We have even more to see what God did than these people did.
And we have ready
And they
access
had a
to it.
lot,
Yes.
but we could read all, all the way through the Bible about what
Yep.
God's done.
King Saul had already won battles against all of Israel's enemies, including the Philistines, and yet fear paralyzed Israel, so that Goliath defeated Israel with just words. They were all ready to fight. They had their armor, they had their weapons, they had the chariots and all that kind of stuff, and they were defeated before they even got into battle, before they even tried, because of that I can't attitude. All right, so what's our battle? What's our lifelong battle? What do we want to accomplish?
Fear the Lord and keep his commandments.
Yes, because our goal is to get to heaven, okay? Our battle is to get to heaven and take as many others with us as we can. Who has Ephesians 6, verse 10 to 12?
Will you want me to go ahead and read through 17?
Not yet.
So, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his mind. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we are not contending against the flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places.
Thank you. All right, so Paul says that, we're not to get into fist fights with somebody over whether or not God exists. That's not what we're here for, okay? But he does say we're fighting against rulers, powers, forces of darkness, forces of wickedness. That starts to sound scary if I think about that too long. If I actually start to dive into what does that mean, those things are bigger than I am. I don't understand those things. They have power that I don't understand. They've existed for so long. I start to think about that very much. That starts to get a little bit overwhelming. And 1 Peter 5:8 describes the devil as a lion. A lion is incredibly powerful, a whole lot more powerful than I am. I can't beat a lion. Okay. And go ahead.
Well, it says, and the host, and the last part of verse 12, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places.
Up above, yeah. It's not on this earth, not in a physical realm. Our
That
yeah.
I don't quite understand. Heavenly places, how is it wicked?
Heavenly in this case probably just means not physical. The things of, when Paul talks about things above and that kind of thing, that there's a spiritual realm where there's a fight for our souls. And so there's a spiritual where our battle is against Satan and his efforts against us. I'm not fighting my neighbor who's an atheist. I'm just kind of like, I'm not going to get in a fight with you. But my battle is the devil's trying to get between me and heaven. And he's going to do anything he can. And and he's described as this lion. He's described as, he's bigger and stronger than I am. And it starts to feel a bit scary until I remember God has already won that battle.
And he's done one war.
He's done the work, all of it. It's already done. It's already done.
And the devil.
Yes. And so that is why he's just trying every single thing that he can in every single different way that he can to get us, because if he can, then he wins over us.
Talking about the heavenly places, actually, the Spirit lives within us. And so that is, to me, that's part of heaven that lives in me. It's part of God, which lives in me. And there is
But he doesn't exist in a physical form, I think is all that Paul is saying here. So heavenly places it refers to more of a spiritual realm than a physical realm. And in that sense, the devil is not he's not going to walk up to you with a tail and a pitchfork, okay, because he's not a physical being. But again, so let's go ahead and finish out reading here, verses 13 to 17.
Therefore, take the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Therefore, having girded your loins with truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the equipment of the gospel of peace. Besides all these, taking the shield of faith, with which you can quench all the flaming darts of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God.
Thank you. All right. Knowing that God has already won the battle, but God just doesn't send us out there and say, okay, be warm and filled and know that I'm in control. He has prepared us through his word to fight the battle that Paul describes, to fight any kind of attack from the devil. We are protected. I mean, that armor, what we have, the knowledge that God gives us, all of these things protects us, and it gives us, gives us a chance, gives us, we are able to choose whether or not we sin, whether or not we are going to go to heaven. We are soldiers. We have armor that protects us. Now, soldiers don't gear up and then just kind of sit down and wait for somebody else to fight. Okay, we have a fight. Our first battle is with ourselves. I mean, Paul describes that. He says, when he talks about, he disciplines his body daily in case that he gets, thrown off track, because you can see it happen. You saw it happen with Saul, who started off with the Spirit of God, got led into disobedience. He tripped up, he stumbled. Okay, that can happen to anyone at any point, but we are ready. I mean, and God prepares us. He doesn't just, kind of, okay, you have, you're going to be fighting for your souls, but and there you go. He protects us. We have this armor that's described because we have all this, we have everything that we need to know. And so it protects us, it guides us, and it gives us absolute certainty that God has already won that battle. All I've got to do is just, make my decisions every day, help somebody else. Okay, I don't have to control the direction of this country. I don't have to control politics or all this other stuff that's going on. I can't. Now we're in a unique position historically that we can vote and we can use that to help make changes. But that's not my responsibility. You know, I do what I can there, but my responsibility is, am I on the right path? Am I helping others be on the right path? Am I calling my kid and saying, hey, you know, are you going? You know, how's your walk with God? You know, how's your daily Bible reading? Okay, I can do all of those things, and I can know that God has already won the battle, and so I can hang on to that regardless of what's thrown at me. I mean, when we're in a battle with the devil, he throws everything at us because he wants to win. And if we give up, if we stumble, there's no reason for us to do that because God is right there and it's his power that guides us. But we have a choice and we have to make that choice every day. We have work to do. Any comments as we're finishing up? Stunned
I'd be
silence.
Thinking about how we look back at Israel and all of our forefathers that are described in the Bible. Why couldn't they see? We have all of
Yes.
that, all of their answers.
And how much do we
here
not
we
see?
have the New Testament where
Mhm.
Jesus, what's our excuse? And
Yep.
it comes down to me personally.
Yes.
What is my problem?
Yes.
We're human beings.
Yeah.
Well, that describes us.
Yes.
That's what.
No, but I mean, that's
That's
what human
Yes.
beings have is always.
That's the.
Oh, yeah.
Fullest of ways.
Because
Yep.
it is a bad, he wouldn't give us armor if it weren't that we were going. to
Right.
Fight a fight. I mean, we were not going to fight a battle. We wouldn't need this armor.
Mhm.
However, he's given it to us. We.
Oh, yeah.
must
I think
use it
Paul
and
described that well,
recognize.
too, in Corinthians, where you're constantly battling himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the
Things
first
I
battle.
want to do,
Uh-huh.
I don't do it.
Yep.
Do, I don't do
But
it.
again, that's what the armor of God protected him from, was from his own temptations. All right. So in finishing up here, fear is defined as an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. In my opinion, one of the more successful attacks by the devil is not to terrify us necessarily, but make us uncomfortable. And just, make us uncomfortable enough to keep us from acting. And not acting, we're frozen. Okay, that's, we are paralyzed. If we don't do anything, that's paralysis. Okay, yeah, that's that lukewarm that you can't. That Jesus says, I can't do anything with this. If you're lukewarm and not doing not one way or the other, I can't do anything with you. If we're paralyzed for whatever reason, whether it's out of total fear or I'm just uncomfortable, so I can't. I don't really believe that I can do this. Then we're still not acting. We're still making that decision, and it's a decision. It's not. I just won't. I just won't. It's a decision not to act. And the devil wants us to go through life, just keep on doing what you're doing, comfortable as possible, no bumps in the road, and because no one accidentally gets to heaven. And the devil, that's one of the biggest lies of the devil is you're a good person, just keep on, just kind of slide right along through life, and we'll slide right past heaven. If you're just on autopilot through your life, and I know so many people who just, I'm just every day I don't do anything bad, but the inaction of not doing anything good, the paralysis against doing anything good, yes. And if we're just sliding through life on autopilot, we'll just slide right past heaven. And that is one of the more effective attacks of the devil, because if he attacks us straight on, then it's kind of, okay, I'm ready for that. But if it's just this little chipping away and just kind of fall asleep at the wheel here kind of thing, then we'll just slide on past. We are in the fight of our lives for our souls every day. There's not a moment until we take our last breath that we are not in a fight against the devil for our souls. But God has already won that battle. And I want to finish up with 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 57 and 58 here, which reads, "But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." We've already got it. "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. All right. Yes. Thank you so much for your time and for your comments.